Today's episode is sponsored by Vitality Health RX Supplements. Whether you're an athlete, a busy professional, or just someone looking to prioritize health, Vitality Health RX has what you need. With premium ingredients and rigorous quality control, their supplements support your body's natural functions. Visit shopvrx.com and use code FEELGREAT15 for 15% off your first order. Thanks to Vitality Health RX for sponsoring this episode. Now let's dive in.
Hi everyone, it's Dr. Mcswain. I hope you're doing really great. I'm so glad that you're joining the podcast today. And before we get started, I want to talk to you about something that I've been working on behind the scenes. It's a really exciting opportunity. Now, it's not quite ready to tell you everything about it, but we have been working on ways to enhance your health journey. So I have been really appreciating everyone who's been leaving comments and suggestions about the podcast and also telling me what your concerns are and what you want more of. So stay tuned as we get ready to tell you that in the upcoming episodes. Make sure to please put your email in the place at the bottom of the blog so that we can get you this information. I'm so excited I can hardly contain myself, but I'm going to focus on the podcast now. So this podcast is actually about feeling drained and what you can do about it. Please remember that the information provided in this podcast is for educational purposes only. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or health objectives. Okay, welcome. Welcome to today's topic, episode 137, Feeling Drained, or How to Not Feel Drained, right? How to get the party started. All right, so we're going to explore how exercise, caffeine, and even the food you eat can affect your energy levels, your heart's pumping action, and your overall health. I want you to know that I am definitely looking at this from a way to apply some really important medical and physiologic concepts into improving your everyday lifestyle health. So when we look at this, why do we sometimes reach for caffeine when we should focus on movement? Okay, and what happens to our body when we don't get our heart rate up? This can often lead to stagnation in vital organs like the heart and the liver. So some of you might be thinking, how can exercise really replace caffeine when I need that immediate energy boost? Well, we'll explore why relying on too much caffeine may not be as effective as we think. Okay, the heart as a pump. Duh. I don't know how to say it any other way. The heart is a pump. It's a huge muscle. Its whole job is to do this. It uses tons of oxygen. It has a lot of mitochondria, which is this power plant to make energy. So the heart it's our pump, right? And it's very important to facilitate the movement that happens within our bodies. Okay, so our heart can get racing from any number of things, right? It can happen with stress, perceived stress, caffeine, exercise, all right? They stimulate the heart, but these all do this in very different ways, okay? So caffeine is this significant adrenaline surge, right? Because of its compound. Caffeine surges the adrenals. It surges the adrenaline in our body. It stimulates the adrenal glands. And then from it, we get an energy boost, right? We might have more focus, or we might have less of a headache. We might have clearer thinking. We might just have that oomph that we needed. And then, but we don't have to do anything to get that, right? Other than this, like pour the coffee or pour the espresso, put it in a cup and put it to our mouth. So it's a really easy win, right? It's right there. Where exercise, we often think of okay, do I have the right clothes on? Am I in the right place? Am I going to get sweaty on my clothes? Is it going to affect my hair? I know that's important. So anyway, exercise naturally raises our heart rate, and obviously it can raise it a little bit or can raise it a lot depending on the exercise that we're doing. However, what exercise does is it strengthens the cardiovascular system. It promotes long-term heart health, and it gives us this surge. I'm going to get into that into a second. So we might turn to caffeine for an instant pickup, but over time, this becomes a cycle of dependence. And so it is fine using coffee in moderation, but it doesn't provide the cardiovascular benefits of exercise. It doesn't strengthen the heart over time. And what it actually can do is provide a lot of confusion in the body. And I'm not against caffeine. I enjoy an espresso shot in the morning. Sometimes I enjoy it about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think it has a lot of place in our bodies. Actually, there's a lot of benefits to caffeine with the antioxidants and things like that. So I'm not speaking against caffeine. What I'm showing is how we can go to an easy win to get our adrenals involved when we want to actually think about how exercise and movement can also be an easy win if you know how to incorporate it into your life, and also how to recognize symptoms that maybe that caffeine overdependence can actually be kind of overlaid with your movement activities, so that we can get more activities that promote our well-being for the long term through movement and exercise. And please don't come to this conversation with preconceived notions of what I'm saying for movement and exercise, because I am not someone that thinks you should go run 6 miles when you have barely been able to have any time for yourself, and it's 9 o'clock at night and you're taking care of your family and your job and your community. That is not it at all. What I want to do is offer you a way to actually listen to this and then say, oh, you know what? I listened to this, and yeah, I can have a cup of coffee, fine. But what I really want to think about too is how I can add just like 1 minute of something in my day. So you go to pick up the kids, they're not ready, and you get out of the car and you do some squats for a minute, right? And you're like, okay, that was good. My heart's beating. I have a little focus. My muscles are engaged. And I feel that pumping throughout my body. Those are the kind of ideas that I want you to think, is how to incorporate movement almost like you're incorporating sneaking over to Starbucks to get another jolt, right? Because you need that adrenaline to keep pumping. But we have a very organized way in our body that gives us this renewing well of energy. And part of that is movement and exercise. And so I want you to understand that might feel like the last thing you want to do when you're tired, but how can we do it that even when you're tired, you might actually be able to get some movement a little bit in, a little bit of exercise, a little bit of getting that pump naturally going. That's what I'm hoping we explore today. All right, so how do we get adrenal surges? Well, what are adrenal surges, right? So adrenaline is something that we release in a usually in a high stress state. But when also adrenaline, we think about the other adrenal organs that are coming along to support us, and that includes cortisol, right, which regulates blood sugar. It also includes aldosterone, which helps us regulate our blood pressure, very important hormone from the adrenals. And then we also look at something called DHEA, which is about libido, confidence, feeling just that the world is good, the world is for you. Okay, so when we think about how to get that kind of activation of the adrenals or these adrenaline surges, we know that the morning really gives us a good peak, and then we know that throughout the day we have a wane, okay, and into the evening, and that settles us in to sleep, right? So these patterns exist throughout the day. But when we think about adrenal surges, I want you to think about more about how you get started in the day, it feels kind of good. You might grab a cup of coffee. For me, I walk my dog. He's kind of a stroller. He loves to kind of stroll and sniff and investigate. And so it's not actually a walk of enthusiasm, right? It's a very chill walk, and we stroll and then we stop. Okay, so what do? I like to put in some squats while he stops, right? I like to do some leg kicks, things that can look, just like a little bit of a HIIT routine, right? High impact training, high intensity impact training. So do I HIIT training. And HIIT training is just basically you're doing these little surges so that your body can get that energy going. The other thing that you might want to know is that didn't come from someone just crafting it for marketing purposes, right? It actually comes from this idea that our body likes to have that stress in the heart, that surge and then that release. So that surge and that release, or that surge and then that reduction. We want to create adrenal surges naturally. When we use movement, we emphasize small amounts of exercise to help stimulate the heart and improve circulation. This does not only benefit the heart, it benefits all the other organs, particularly the liver, the lungs, the kidneys, all these things that have to pump and are involved with fluid regulation. Because remember, blood is a fluid. It needs to pump and be pushed around, and then there's the fluid that goes into the rest of the cells that also has to be pumped and moved to the appropriate place. Okay, so as we age chronologically or metabolically, we might start settling in to some sedentary routines. We might pick the stressful enthusiasm of working in our brains, which we all like as we get older and we start to design things and become more administering over our work and in our families. But we still have to be that doer, right? We still have to get that movement going, because sedentary is exactly what starts to happen, right? I say first you're standing, then you're sitting, then you're laying, right? And you get to start having that progressive decline that we see happen for some people in 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and how we have this progressive decline that we can really fight against. But really today, I want you just to think a little bit more short term, a little bit more maybe in the morning or in the evening or the afternoon, just kind of breaking your day up into 2 to 3 different divisions and saying, okay, what did I do to move? What did I do to get that pump going in my body? How am I kind of feeling a little bit of pep from the natural way my body is designed to move to give me that pep, i.e. adrenal surge? And of course, we often think like, okay, what are the reasons that we have to protect ourselves, right? So when we start to get more sedentary, we might start to have less mobility, or we might have more joint aches. We might just don't have that oomph, right? The adrenals are just tired. We're kind of dragging throughout the day, really feeling drained. So if you feel drained and then someone says go exercise, you usually just shut them off, right? And I think that's really fair, because I don't think they're relating to you. And I think they're saying like, go do something that doesn't make sense, or go do something right now that you perceive to actually be harmful to you potentially, right? I get that. And that's, again, not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is move in your body, shift in your body, sway in your body, lift up your heels, put it down. Like even if you're doing that while you're waiting at a red light, even doing wrist circles, back and forth, and just these little things to kind of keep your body thinking about movement will actually trigger how we're inherently designed to move in our body to keep our muscles activated. So our muscles do like to be activated. They do like to work. And these little stimuluses, very little sometimes, can be just enough to keep us going, keep our pump moving, and that will keep our adrenals surging. It will give us that pep. So that's, maybe you're laying on the couch right now listening to this. You gently shift one of your legs side to side, right? Or maybe drag your heel and bend your knees, and then drag your heel out. So you drag your heel, bend your knee, drag your heel out, and just feel how you're just getting that gliding, which is part of movement, right? Some people just want to go sit on a swing or a hammock. That makes a lot of sense. Some people want to get in those float tanks. Okay, I do enjoy the float tank. I think it's really a nice way to kind of just move or be moved by the elevated salt water, and then you just kind of shift in that. It allows the mind to leave and just kind of just leave and feel connected to that movement. And it's a really fun way to kind of be laying down doing nothing, but still get a little bit of movement in. So there are a lot of little things like this. Now, clearly, float does usually take a half an hour session. It's done in a certain location, usually area around the mall. They have these centers of healing now that are very comfortable. And the float tank or the float device, you lay usually horizontal and completely, and you just float. And it's very private. It's very quiet. There's not really any sensory activation. So you're just feeling that movement of the fluid underneath you, floating. It's pretty cool. But I want you to think too that gentle movement is a good place to start. And then the other thing that is really helpful is movement that is towards the midline. So that's why I like squats for people, because squatting is both legs are planted on the ground, both feet are planted on the ground, both legs are solid, and it's the core muscles that are going down even just a little bit. When people think about squatting, I think sometimes they think about their butt going all the way below their knees. And that is not the place to start. And I'll tell you, most of the time, that isn't a good idea for the knee joints or the hip joints. And I'll get into that in a future episode. But right now, just think about 2 inches down, 2 inches up. Nice and slow, nice and contained, but get those squats going so you feel them in the glutes. Again, that's a core muscle. And that core muscle going will really help pump the rest of the body. It'll help pump fluid, and it will also help the heart kind of get that little bit of extra oomph. And that little extra oomph will then facilitate you through the rest of the day. And I've noticed this change as well with my walks with Nico. So before I had Nico, my dog, I would just walk because that was my pace. I like to walk with purpose, is what I say. And so I would walk, get places. And then my Nico blessed my life. And Nico likes to stroll, as I mentioned. He strolls and I do HIIT. I just like to get some squats in, while he's strolling and stopping. I like to get those leg lifts like I mentioned. But again, then we stroll. So there's actually some great research with that, with the Cooper Institute, with diabetes, that you get that little surge and then you rest, right? And by resting, we stroll a little bit. So that is an understanding of some things to incorporate. Okay, so when we look at, again, the adrenal curve, I recognize that this is a very important physiologic concept that plays out in our lives. So we have energy in the morning and then it wanes. And one of the things that I recognize with my patients is that they will start to have this peak, as we all have this peak. So people crave caffeine and movement even in the morning. And then if they use caffeine, they'll get a higher peak than they might naturally get. But that also means they're going to slope and have a bigger crash in the afternoon. So it might be a better way to approach it is how to not have that crash in the early afternoon. And that's really okay, you're going to get out of your chair, you're going to do that post-lunch kind of 10-minute walk, make some laps. You're going to just be in your office. Some people just need to lay down on the floor for just 2 or 3 minutes, maybe do some knee movements, maybe stretch their arms and their legs as far as they can. This also helps support the heart because it's helping with the fluid equalization. And again, remember the adrenals, which we talk a lot about adrenaline, we talk about cortisol with blood sugar, but remember aldosterone is a lot about how we hold or release stress, and that has a lot to do with our blood pressure. So when people can fluid equalize by laying horizontal, stretch it out, give it a minute, they're actually going to help give themselves some more energy. And there's very good research for this actually in fertility, of laying flat a few times a day to fluid equalize. And you can use it again just to kind of fluid equalize. So take some work off the heart, because the heart has to do a lot of pumping up, a lot of action there. And if you lay flat, then you're able to get some of the fluid a little more equalized and defy gravity. Okay, and that can help you really with a lot of things that happen that make us feel fatigued, right? So I've been kind of talking about these from a lifestyle perspective. I've introduced some things about physiology, but we often use the term adrenal fatigue. While not necessarily recognized in a greater community, we talk about other organ fatigues. The adrenals are a significant gland, just like the thyroid. So I don't understand any argument to that. So if you can have thyroid fatigue, you can definitely have adrenal fatigue, because these are glands that secrete a lot of important hormones. And so again, that's why we surge on things like caffeine, because it directly stimulates the adrenals and then it boosts us. But we want to make sure we can use that to support our well-being, right? And get things going, but not make it a crutch. And usually what happens then is we can then go into kind of a lack of movement, because our heart gets raced, it gets stressed, but our body doesn't really get into this movement happening. And that can then also be a little discoordinated throughout our body, leading to some feelings of sluggishness, leading to some feelings of confusion, like my heart needs to race so that I can have some good endorphins that come from this. My DHEA can be stimulated so I can have this self-confidence and libido and all these feelings. And that's really important to recognize that when we start to kind of feel a decline and we use caffeine as a surge, we still are having this sedentary decline happening in our body. That can be stress, poor sleep. It can be just exhaustion, right? You're drained. What do? You lay on the couch. You try to reclaim some of that energy. Grab a cup of coffee to do that. And those things can be fine, but when we find then that we're becoming more sedentary and then our joints are fatigued and then we start retaining fluid, okay? Fluid retention is a very big deal because fluid is very much a part of how our body has to then work harder, because now there's fluid, which is very heavy on our body, is now kind of stagnant, okay? So stagnant fluid has loads of problems, but when you use caffeine to stimulate your heart and you use it to stimulate your adrenals as opposed to exercise, it really doesn't help that much with fluid retention. And yes, you could definitely say that if you're using caffeine, a lot of times it can be a diuretic, but oftentimes for people it can actually be an intravascular diuretic, which means it makes the blood dehydrated in the blood vessel. And so you're not actually pulling fluid from the tissue or the peripheral tissue. You're pulling it from the place of least resistance, which is inside the blood vessels. So that's how people are getting a diuresing effect from the caffeine sometimes, but not necessarily getting the fluid to move. Hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, just tell me in the questions, just tell me in the comments and I can explain it, or we could work on an infographic or whatever you need to help understand that. But let's talk about fluid retention and then weight gain. So if the heart isn't really pumping, right, the fluid accumulates. Fluid is heavy. Fluid is not only heavy on the scale, it's heavy on the tissue. So it's as it fills into places that it can congest. These places can often be the armpits, the breast tissue, the adipose tissue and around the abdomen, the glutes, right, start to have fluid retention. The back of the thighs where the hamstrings are, okay, and other areas. Your hands and your feet can swell. That's a little less common, but this idea that the fluid accumulating on these areas, like the chest, makes it harder for the inside muscles to move, right? And so then it also can happen not just around the outside, but what can also happen is it can happen on the inside. Then we look at organs that start to have kind of a fluid retention accumulation. We look at the liver, right? So the liver can get congested. The liver's job is a filter. I mean, it's unarguably a filter, right? It does a lot of other things, but it's unarguably a filter. Well, why does the body have a filter in it? To move out waste, right? It needs a pump action. So fluid stagnation is an issue when it comes to what's happening when we don't have that kind of movement to pump that fluid through and to support that filtration system of the liver, okay? What about the heart? So if it's heavy on the heart, then the fluid can actually overwhelm the heart. It has to work harder, and that places a lot of strain on the heart. So your heart, just as from an anatomical physiologic perspective, and this is very brief, but basically, and I love to talk about it, but I'll be very, very brief. Your heart has two sides, right? It has the left side and the right side, okay? When we're in utero, we use the right side more, and it has to do with how the lungs are different and we don't have oxygen that's coming through. That's, this is how our whole system is different. So the right ventricle works more. When we are out of the womb, the left ventricle works more. And so the left ventricle is this really fabulous muscle, right? And it's really designed to really do a great job squeezing and also having pressure release. So the squeezing pressure is systolic blood pressure, and that's the top number. And then the resting pressure of the heart is the diastolic, and that's the lower number. So 120 is systolic, that's the squeezing, and 80 is the diastolic, and that's the resting pressure of the heart, of the left ventricle primarily. Well, when the heart has to recruit the right ventricle, that is not a great thing at all. It basically, the right ventricle just kind of hangs out. So you have this kind of large left ventricle and this little right ventricle. Okay, but if the right ventricle starts to also have to work to pull up the fluid, then it starts to release a biomarker called BNP. And BNP is a biomarker for congestive heart failure, okay? And the classifications of congestive heart failure. So when we look at what's happening here, the heart isn't able to maintain the fluid, okay? And so we know that exercise and movement helps support the pumping action, and this can support the relief of the right ventricle. And I know that that's going to get some objections. And I completely understand for people who are struggling with congestive heart failure, moderate to severe, that they're often told, just go rest. Don't use the heart any more than you have to. Well, just think about that and try to relate that to the realities of what the body's inherently designed to do, which is to move. And the heart facilitates that movement, and the movement facilitates the heart. Okay, so not moving means not facilitating the natural ability of the heart. Okay, so the pump has more work to do. And there are a lot of medications, and I'm not going to discuss those, although I can. But I want you to understand just putting some things in place there, and also thinking about, okay, that's a diagnosis, right? Congestive heart failure classifications, those are all diagnoses, but where can we put an ounce of prevention to have a pound of cure? And I will tell you, that is the whole point of the beginning of this episode, is to discuss with you that everyday habit of maybe just moving your leg a little bit more, maybe just having that extra minute and finding that minute to move. Or if you're in that minute, putting your head to, okay, instead of grabbing another cup of coffee or, dosing that down, I'm going to do something that gets my heart just kind of gently going, gets my body gently moving, because my heart needs it. My liver needs it. And also, like I said, your kidneys need it, because your kidneys have to do a lot of work to move fluid through, and that puts a lot of strain on the kidneys. Okay, and I do see kidney disease. The kidneys can be supported. The heart can definitely be supported with nutraceuticals and a lot of things to facilitate the inherent ability of these organs to do their job. I think that's awesome. So what do? Well, how do we facilitate energy for this movement? All right. And here is another little important element that I believe, which is carbohydrate as a pre-workout fuel. So the role of carbohydrates is really important. It's simple energy, and it feeds the muscles. And insulin brings blood sugar or blood glucose or carbohydrates into the muscles, and then the muscles work better. That's what happens. So using your carbs at a time when you're going to go exercise. And this can be even, it can be a small apple, right? It can be a few dates. It can be some vegetables. It can be some carrots. It can be a lot of different carbs, but it's not a lot of carbs, maybe 15 grams, which is a small apple, which is a small little, any number of things for carbs, but a small pastry, I was even going to say, or a small bar, right? A small little fuel bar or something, or juice, right? These have simple carbs that are nutrient-based carbs. That's the really important thing I want to say. Yes, nutrient-based carbs. So if it means you're having a small blueberry muffin, or it means you're having oat flour or almond flour, right? If you're having something that gives you just a little bit of a surge with carbohydrates, that's going to go into the muscles. And now here you have just a little bit more oomph. Okay, I also, there's a lot of other things we can do for pre-workout fuel. If you can think about that though, but think about maybe a little bit of a protein shake in a good amount of water, maybe 12 ounces or 16 ounces of water, and maybe a half a scoop, something like that. give you kind of that simple fuel ready to absorb. I love Daily Greens for this because it's tons of phytonutrients in powder form added to water. You have a lot to go because of the phytonutrients more than the carbs, because there's hardly any carbs in that at all. I think there's 1 gram. But nonetheless, there's ways to fuel your workout, and I just want to introduce the idea that you can use carbohydrates at that time. And this is a very old idea. A lot of carb loading before marathon runs, right? We used to think about that in the 80s and the 90s. I don't know if that's still in favor, but the idea of a carb preload to have all those fuels available. A lot of people, when they run, they'll use these little jelly packs. Very synthetic, very processed. I get it's a fuel source, but it's a very confusing fuel source in my opinion. I'd rather you look to something that's plant-based to support you as a pre-workout fuel. This is very nice. You get the carbs in, you get a little support of those muscles, and you get to have that movement, and it feels even better because it's in line with how your body uses nutrients to support your ability to heal and to feel great and prevent problems. Again, just thinking about how we can do that. If you feel like you're over-relying on caffeine, then hey, just let's think about a minute, or let's think about, hey, I'm gonna, be on the couch and shift a little, or maybe you'll be on the floor for a minute before you get on the couch, right? Or maybe you're waiting for something, you're doing the dishes and you're just kind of moving your arms, you might be walking in place. These are the little things that when people are stressed out or they have a lot of things going on that can be implemented to lifestyle, which actually then can propel you to have more energy and feel less drained. And that's the goal for today's conversation. So it's not just about being tired when you're feeling drained. It's a sign that your body's pump systems, so the heart, the liver, the kidneys, are not getting the support that they need. And caffeine and carbs can often, processed carbs can often provide short-term fixes. Relying on them too much can lead to a cycle of energy highs and lows, and which is very detrimental to the body. So I think it is easy to feel like feeling drained is just part of life. But simple changes like incorporating some 1-minute movement, recognizing how you can use carbs to good healthy carbs to facilitate movement, you can start breaking this cycle of decline. So please think about it. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you're doing. And I appreciate that feedback. Thank you very much. Remember to put your email in. We've got a lot of really exciting things happening and moving forward. A podcast is just the beginning. Have a great day.